Have you ever wondered how a single act of courage could transform someone's life completely? This isn't just another rags to riches tale. It's a story about how our society values different types of heroism, the invisible barriers that keep hardworking people in poverty, and what happens when those barriers finally crumble. Join me as we explore how Miguel Ramirez, a janitor earning minimum wage, risked everything to save a dog from a burning building, and how this one act of compassion rippled through an entire community, challenging our assumptions about worth, dignity, and what truly matters in life. The morning sun had barely crested over the downtown skyline when Miguel Ramirez arrived at Pinnacle Enterprises. At 52, his shoulders already carried the weight of decades of physical labor. Every morning for 15 years, he had slipped through the employee entrance at 4:30 a.m., well before the executives arrived in their luxury cars. Like most of the cleaning staff, Miguel existed in the margins of this gleaming corporate world, essential yet invisible. Buenos dias, Maria. He greeted his co-worker, a middle-aged woman who cleaned the executive bathrooms. They exchanged tired smiles before heading to their respective floors. Miguel's domain was the 42nd floor executive territory. He knew every corner of it, every desk, every plant that needed watering. He knew which executives left coffee mugs with dried rings, which ones dropped food under their desks, which ones bothered to learn his name. The CEO, Jonathan Mercer, fell into none of these categories. In the rare moments their paths crossed, Mercer's eyes would slide past Miguel as if he were part of the furniture. The only living being on the 42nd floor that acknowledged Miguel's existence was Mercer's dog, a golden retriever named Apollo, who sometimes accompanied his owner to work. "Hola, amigo," Miguel would whisper when they were alone, sneaking Apollo treats he kept in his pocket. The dog would wag his tail furiously, pressing against Miguel's legs as the janitor went about his work. On this particular Tuesday, Miguel finished the executive floor ahead of schedule. The morning silence was broken only by the distant hum of the building systems coming to life. He was emptying trash bins in Mercer's office when he smelled something strange, a sharp, burning odor that didn't belong. Years ago, back in El Salvador, Miguel had worked as a volunteer firefighter in his village. That experience had taught him to trust his senses, especially when it came to fire. Setting down his trash bag, he moved methodically through the office, following the scent. It led him to a small utility closet, where electrical panels controlled the floor systems. When he opened the door, smoke immediately billowed out. Behind the panels, flames were already licking up the wall, feeding on exposed wiring. The fire suppression system hadn't triggered. Later, investigators would discover it had been improperly installed during recent renovations. Miguel grabbed the nearest fire extinguisher, but quickly realized the fire had progressed too far. He pulled the fire alarm and called security using the office phone, reporting the situation in his accented but clear English. As smoke began filling the floor, Miguel headed for the stairwell. That's when he heard it, a frightened whimper coming from beneath Mercer's desk. Apollo had been left behind that morning, curled up in his bed in the corner of the office. Now the dog was hiding, paralyzed with fear as smoke filled the room. The security guard's voice crackled over the phone. "Sir, firefighters are on their way. Please evacuate immediately." Miguel looked toward the stairwell door, then back at the trembling dog. The fire was spreading quickly, and the smoke was getting thicker. Every moment he stayed put his own life at risk. No one would blame him for saving himself. He had children waiting at home, a family that depended on his income. But in that moment, Miguel saw only a frightened creature in need. Pulling his work shirt over his mouth, he crawled toward the desk. "Ven aquí, Apollo," he called softly. The dog refused to move. Time was running out. The smoke was becoming unbearable, and Miguel could hear the flames crackling closer. With a swift movement, he grabbed Apollo, tucking the 70-pound dog awkwardly under his arm. The retriever struggled at first, then went limp with fear. The journey to the stairwell felt endless. Miguel's lungs burned and his eyes streamed with tears. Each step was an effort of will. By the time he reached the stairs, he was almost crawling, with Apollo's weight making his progress painfully slow. 42 floors down, Miguel stopped counting after the first 10. His knees ached, his chest felt like it was on fire, but he kept moving. Somewhere around the 20th floor, he encountered firefighters coming up. "Sir, are you hurt?" one asked, reaching for Apollo. Miguel shook his head, refusing to relinquish the dog. "I promise him," was all he managed to say between coughs. When Miguel finally emerged from the building, the morning light seemed unnaturally bright. The plaza was filled with evacuated employees and emergency vehicles. Paramedics immediately guided him to an ambulance, where they placed an oxygen mask over his face. Still, he wouldn't let go of Apollo until they assured him the dog would receive care too. Later that day, as Miguel sat in the emergency room being treated for smoke inhalation, he had no idea that videos of his exit from the building, carrying the CEO's beloved pet, were already circulating online. A receptionist had captured the moment on her phone, a soot-covered janitor emerging from the smoke, clutching a golden retriever to his chest, refusing medical attention until someone promised to care for the animal. By evening, the city news had picked up the story. Heroic janitor risks life to save CEO's dog. But Miguel wasn't watching. He was at home in his small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, assuring his worried children that he was fine, that the doctor said his lungs would heal, that he would be back at work soon, if there was still work to be had. Given the damage to the executive floor, what Miguel didn't know was that Jonathan Mercer had been frantically calling the hospital, trying to locate the man who saved Apollo. What he didn't know was that his simple act of compassion had penetrated the carefully constructed walls that separated his world from Mercer's. What he didn't know was that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. As he fell into an exhausted sleep that night, Miguel Ramirez was still just a janitor, underpaid, overlooked, one unexpected medical bill away from financial disaster. But tomorrow would bring a different reality, one where the invisible suddenly became seen. The following morning, Miguel woke to his phone buzzing relentlessly. His throat burned with each breath, a painful reminder of yesterday's fire. The doctor had prescribed rest for at least a week, but Miguel couldn't afford to miss work, not with rent due and his daughter's college application fees looming. When he finally answered the phone, he was surprised to hear the voice of Lisa Chun, Pinnacle Enterprises HR director. "Mr. Ramirez," she said, her tone uncharacteristically warm. "Mr. Mercer has been trying to reach you. He'd like to meet with you today, if possible." Miguel sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in his chest. In 15 years, the CEO had never asked to meet with him. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked, his mind racing to protocols he might have violated during the emergency. Lisa's laugh sounded genuine. "Wrong? Mr. Ramirez, you saved Apollo. Mr. Mercer considers that dog family." 2 hours later, Miguel found himself in the lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel, where Pinnacle had temporarily relocated its executive offices. He felt acutely out of place in his best shirt, still a far cry from the tailored suits that brushed past him. The receptionist gave him a puzzled look when he gave his name, but directed him to the penthouse suite. When the elevator doors opened directly into the suite, Miguel was greeted not just by Jonathan Mercer, but by a room full of people. Executives he recognized from his years of early morning cleaning, and others holding cameras and notepads who he assumed were journalists. Apollo bounded across the room, nearly knocking Miguel over with enthusiastic greeting. "There he is." Mercer boomed, crossing the room with hand extended. "The man who saved my best friend." The next hour passed in a blur. Mercer insisted Miguel take the seat of honor as photographers captured the CEO shaking hands with the janitor. Journalists peppered him with questions about his heroism, which Miguel answered haltingly, his English becoming more accented under pressure. "It wasn't heroic," he insisted repeatedly. "Anyone would do the same." But the narrative had already taken shape. The humble immigrant janitor risking his life for man's best friend made for an irresistible human interest story. What the cameras didn't capture were Miguel's thoughts, that if he lost his job, finding another would be nearly impossible at his age, that his daughter Carmen's dream of becoming a nurse might evaporate without his income, that his son Luis had already dropped out of community college to work full-time supporting the family. When the media finally departed, Mercer's public relations smile faded into something more genuine. "Mr. Ramirez, Miguel, I owe you more than I can express. Apollo is the last living connection to my late wife. When I heard about the fire, all I could think about was him trapped up there." For the first time, Miguel saw Mercer as a person rather than a symbol of power, a man who had experienced loss, who could feel fear. "I'm glad I could help, Mr. Mercer. Jonathan, please." Mercer gestured toward a private sitting area. "We should talk about how I can properly thank you." Miguel shook his head firmly. "No thanks necessary. I was just doing what's right." "Nonsense," Mercer insisted. "I understand your children." The conversation that followed was surreal. Miguel found himself sharing details of his life he kept carefully separate from his workplace. His journey from El Salvador 20 years ago, his wife's death from cancer when the children were small, his struggles to provide opportunities his children deserved. "Carmen, she's brilliant," Miguel said, pride momentarily overcoming his reticence. "Gets all A's. Applied to nursing school. But the cost." He trailed off, uncomfortable discussing financial struggles with a man whose watch probably cost more than his annual salary. When Miguel left the hotel that afternoon, he carried a check that would cover Carmen's entire nursing school education. He also had a promise of a full scholarship for Luis to return to college, and the news that his own position was being reconsidered with a substantial raise to come. On the bus ride home, Miguel felt a complex mixture of gratitude and discomfort. The generosity was life-changing, but why had it taken saving a dog from Mercer to see him as a person worthy of decent compensation? For 15 years, he had cleaned that office meticulously, worked holidays without complaint, taken on extra shifts when others called out. None of that had merited acknowledgement. That evening, as local news broadcasts showed the heartwarming footage of CEO and janitor shaking hands, the comment sections filled with praise for Mercer's generosity. Few questioned why a man who cleaned the offices of one of the city's most profitable companies had been struggling to put his children through school in the first place. Carmen watched the coverage with growing indignation. "Dad, you've always been a hero," she said, gripping his hand. "Not just yesterday. Every single day, working so hard for us." Miguel squeezed back, seeing in his daughter's eyes the same fierce intelligence that had characterized her mother. "This is an opportunity, Mija. Don't worry about how it came." But something had shifted in Miguel's understanding of the world he had navigated so carefully for decades. The invisible line separating service workers from the executives whose spaces they maintained had momentarily blurred. He had crossed over, been welcomed briefly into the inner circle, and glimpsed the casual power wielded there. 3 days later, Miguel returned to work despite his doctor's recommendation for more rest. The 42nd floor remained closed for repairs, so he was temporarily reassigned to the lobby. For the first time in his career at Pinnacle, employees greeted him by name as they passed through security. Some even stopped to chat, asking about his health, congratulated him on his bravery. On Friday afternoon, Lisa from HR called again. "Mr. Mercer would like to see you before the weekend," she said. "He's working from his home office. A car will pick you up at the end of your shift." The car turned out to be a sleek black limousine with tinted windows. As it pulled away from the curb, Miguel noticed his co-workers watching, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and envy. The social reconfiguration was disorienting. Yesterday he had been invisible. Today he was viewed through a lens of celebrity. Mercer's home was not the ostentatious mansion Miguel had expected, but a modern, glass-walled structure overlooking the bay. Apollo greeted him at the door, tail wagging wildly. Mercer himself appeared moments later, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Miguel's monthly rent. "Miguel, come in, please." Mercer led him through the house to a terrace with a breathtaking view of the sunset over the water. "Drink?" They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, Apollo's head resting contentedly on Miguel's knee. Finally, Mercer set down his glass and leaned forward. "I've been doing some thinking," he said. "About what you did, yes, but also about what revealed." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've been CEO of Pinnacle for 9 years. In that time, we've increased shareholder value by over 300%. What I failed to increase is my own awareness of the people who make that possible." Miguel remained silent, unsure where this was heading. "The truth is, I didn't know your name until this week," Mercer continued. "That's not something I'm proud of." The admission hung in the air between them, an unexpected vulnerability from a man whose wealth insulated him from most forms of discomfort. "What you did wasn't just brave," Mercer said finally. "It showed character, integrity, the willingness to put something you believe in above your own interests." He reached for a folder on the table between them. "Those are qualities I value highly in business partners." Miguel's confusion must have shown on his face, because Mercer smiled. "I'm not offering you charity, Miguel. I'm offering you opportunity." Inside the folder was a proposition that would transform Miguel's life completely, one that would become headline news within days, triggering conversations about worth, visibility, and the arbitrary nature of wealth in America. The manila folder in Miguel's hands contained not just a job offer, but a complete reimagining of what was possible. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Mercer's terrace, Miguel read through the documents with growing disbelief. "I don't understand," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You want to make me an executive?" Mercer leaned forward, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Not just any executive. I want you to head our new workplace dignity initiative, with profit sharing, equity in the company, and a board position." The papers detailed a compensation package worth millions, salary, stock options, benefits that would have seemed like fantasy just days ago. But it was a job description that truly stunned Miguel. Leading a division focused on transforming how Pinnacle treated its service workers, janitorial staff, security personnel, and other typically overlooked employees. "Why me?" Miguel asked, the weight of the opportunity pressing on him like a physical force. "Because you see what I've been blind to," Mercer replied simply. "And because when I asked Apollo's veterinarian who should oversee this initiative, she suggested I find someone with both compassion and courage. Someone who understands the reality of invisibility in our corporate structure." Miguel looked down at Apollo, still resting contentedly against his leg. "The veterinarian?" Mercer smiled. "My late wife's sister. She's been telling me for years that I've lost touch with reality. This week proved her right." As Miguel left Mercer's home that night, the folder tucked carefully under his arm, he felt as though he were walking between worlds. The familiar reality of struggle and sacrifice behind him, an uncharted territory of influence and abundance ahead. The question that troubled his sleep wasn't whether to accept the offer, but whether he could truly bridge these worlds without losing himself in the process. Monday morning found Miguel not in his janitor's uniform, but in a new suit, standing nervously before a gathering of Pinnacle's executives. His children had helped him prepare all weekend. Carmen researching workplace equity initiatives, Luis helping him practice his introduction. Still, as Mercer announced his appointment, Miguel could feel the undercurrents of skepticism and resistance in the room. "Some of you are wondering why I've chosen Miguel for this position," Mercer acknowledged bluntly. "Let me be clear. This isn't about publicity or gratitude for saving Apollo, though I remain profoundly grateful. This is about business excellence. For too long, we've overlooked the expertise and potential of our service employees. That ends today." In the weeks that followed, Miguel's story exploded beyond Pinnacle's walls. Business magazines ran profiles with headlines like "From Mop to Millionaire," "The Janitor Transforming Corporate America," and "Cleaning Up Corporate Culture, Ramirez's Revolution." Social media buzzed with reactions spanning from inspiration to cynicism. What these stories often missed was the profound discomfort Miguel navigated daily. Each morning he passed former colleagues who now reported indirectly to him. Each evening he returned to his neighborhood, where neighbors alternately celebrated his rise and questioned his new allegiance. The borderlands between his past and present were fraught with complexity no headline could capture. "It feels like I'm betraying something," he confessed to Carmen one night, after declining an invitation to move to a wealthier neighborhood. "Like I'm being rewarded for leaving everyone else behind." Carmen, wise beyond her 20 years, took his hand. "Then don't leave them behind. Bring them with you." That conversation sparked what would eventually become Miguel's true legacy at Pinnacle. Under his guidance, the Workplace Dignity Initiative expanded beyond improved wages and benefits to create pathways for advancement previously unimaginable. Janitors with management potential received training and mentorship. Maintenance workers with technical aptitude were sponsored through certification programs. The invisible became visible not through charitable gestures, but through systematic recognition of worth. 6 months after the fire, Miguel stood before Pinnacle's board presenting the initiative's preliminary results. The statistics were compelling. Decreased turnover among service staff, improved operational efficiency, positive press coverage translating to consumer goodwill. But it was the personal stories Miguel shared that silenced the boardroom. Stories of employees whose talents had been overlooked for decades, whose contributions were now transforming the company from within. Ramon from maintenance solved the HVAC efficiency problem that our engineers couldn't crack for 3 years, Miguel reported. Maria from food services redesigned our cafeteria supply chain, cutting costs by 20%. These innovations were always possible. We just weren't listening. By the 1-year anniversary of Apollo's rescue, the Pinnacle model was being studied by business schools and adopted by companies nationwide. Miguel found himself speaking at conferences, consulting with CEOs, advocating for structural changes that recognize the dignity and potential of workers at all levels. The media narrative evolved from simplistic rags to riches storytelling to more complex explorations of systemic inequality. Journalists who initially focused on a heartwarming dog rescue now asked deeper questions. Why had some of Miguel's capabilities been relegated to janitorial work for 15 years? What other talents remained undiscovered in America's workforce due to opportunity barriers? How many innovations, efficiencies, and insights were companies losing by maintaining rigid hierarchies? For Miguel personally, the transformation extended beyond wealth to a profound recalibration of possibility. Luis returned to college, studying business and social entrepreneurship. Carmen excelled in nursing school while developing a program connecting healthcare professionals with immigrant communities. Together, the Ramirez family established a foundation providing educational and entrepreneurial support to service workers and their children. On the evening exactly 1 year after the fire, Miguel sat again on Mercer's terrace, Apollo now comfortably sprawled across his feet. The CEO raised his glass in a toast. To unexpected partnerships, Mercer said, and to seeing what was always there. Miguel nodded, thinking of all the invisible workers whose potential remained untapped, whose dignity remained unacknowledged. His journey had been remarkable, but it was also arbitrary, contingent on being in the right place at the right time with the right dog. True transformation would require more than individual rescue stories. It would demand systematic recognition of the worth inherent in every person, regardless of their position. To visibility, Miguel responded, raising his own glass. And to all those still waiting to be seen. The sun set over the bay, casting a golden light across the water. In that moment, Miguel understood that his true wealth wasn't in his bank accounts or stock options, but in his unique position at the intersection of worlds. He had not lost himself in transformation. Rather, he had expanded what was possible, not just for himself, but for the countless others whose stories remained unwritten, whose potential remained unrealized, whose dignity remained unrecognized. As darkness fell, Miguel and Mercer continued their conversation, planning next steps for the initiative. Apollo dozed contentedly between them, the unwitting catalyst for a ripple of change that would eventually touch thousands of lives, challenging assumptions about worth, visibility, and the arbitrary nature of opportunity in America. In the distance, the lights of the city flickered on one by one, illuminating a landscape of possibility that had always existed, waiting only to be seen.